In 1998, a 97-year-old D-Day veteran named Harold Baumgarten sat down to watch Saving Private Ryan. Baumgarten had landed on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, with the 116th Infantry Regiment. He was shot 5 times during the assault. He watched nearly every man in his company die around him. He survived when almost nobody else did. After watching the film, he said it was the closest any movie had come to capturing what Omaha Beach was actually like. He also said Spielberg got significant things wrong, and that the things he got wrong mattered, because they shaped how an entire generation would understand what happened there. That tension between the most viscerally realistic war film ever made and the specific documented ways it misrepresents history is what this video is about. Saving Private Ryan is a masterpiece. It is also, in ways that have been extensively documented by military historians, combat veterans, and wildfire researchers, historically misleading on several counts that go far beyond the usual movie versus reality nitpicking. The real story of D-Day, the real story of what happened to soldiers like the ones the film depicts, and the real story of the policy the film is built around, the sole survivor policy, are all more complicated, more politically charged, and in some ways more disturbing than anything Spielberg put on screen. Let's go through it, because the men who were actually there deserve the full picture. Let's start with the opening 27 minutes, because they require the most nuanced treatment. The Omaha Beach sequence in Saving Private Ryan is, by the consensus of military historians and combat veterans who have evaluated it, the most accurate depiction of the sensory experience of coming under fire ever captured on film. The desaturated color palette, the handheld camera work, the specific physical details, men drowning under the weight of their equipment, the chaos of a beach with no cover, the complete breakdown of unit cohesion in the first minutes. These are documented realities of what happened on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. Spielberg consulted extensively with veterans. He deliberately broke the conventional rules of action cinematography. The 180-degree rule, the rule of consistent eyeline, to create disorientation that mirrors what survivors described. The decision to desaturate the film stock, to use a shutter angle that makes motion look staccato and unreal, was a technical choice designed to match the visual quality of the Kappa photographs, the only actual photographic record of the first wave assault. Veterans who saw the film reported post-traumatic responses. Some left the cinema. The American veterans of foreign wars endorsed it. By the standard of subjective experiential accuracy, does this feel like what it felt like? Saving Private Ryan achieved something no film before it had. And yet, the Omaha Beach sequence was filmed on Curracloe Beach in County Wexford, Ireland. It is a flat, open, sandy beach. This created a specific visual problem that the film never fully solved. The actual topography of the Omaha Beach landing zones was significantly more varied than what appears on screen. Omaha Beach is divided into 8 sectors, the sectors where the heaviest casualties occurred. Dog Green, where the film primarily depicts action, were characterized not just by open beach, but by specific geographic features, a shingle bank of loose stones several feet high that provided the only meaningful cover on the beach, seawall sections and exits from the beach through draws, valleys in the bluffs that were the tactical objectives of the assault. The film shows an almost featureless killing ground between the water and the bluffs. The reality was that the shingle bank, which survivors crawled to desperately and used as cover, was a critical tactical landmark. Soldiers who reached it had some protection. The ones who didn't make it to the shingle died on the open sand. This distinction between the men who found cover and the men who didn't drove the tactical decisions of the assault in ways the film never depicts. More significantly, the film shows virtually no differentiation between the 8 sectors of Omaha Beach. In reality, the experience varied dramatically by sector. Some sectors were absolute catastrophe. Dog Green, where the Bedford boys of the 116th Infantry were destroyed, and others were, by the brutal standards of D-Day, relatively successful. The film collapses this geographic and tactical complexity into a single undifferentiated horror, which is emotionally powerful but historically flattening. The German defenders in Saving Private Ryan are depicted as a competent, well-equipped, determined force, which is accurate. What is not accurate is the implicit suggestion that they were elite troops facing an assault they were fully prepared for. The primary German unit defending the Omaha Beach sector was the 716th Infantry Division, a static defense division composed largely of older soldiers, many of them non-German conscripts from occupied Eastern European territories, Poles, Russians, Ukrainians who had been pressed into German service. These were not the Waffen-SS, they were not panzer troops. They were second-line garrison soldiers defending fixed positions. What made Omaha Beach catastrophic was not primarily the quality of the German troops. It was the defensive infrastructure. Widerstands Nest, WN62, the strongpoint at the eastern end of Easy Red sector, had interlocking fields of fire that swept the beach from multiple angles simultaneously. The Atlantic Wall fortifications had been engineered specifically to make a frontal assault suicidal. It was the positions that were deadly, not primarily the men in them. This matters because the film's framing subtly implies that the Americans faced a superior fighting force and overcame it through courage. The reality is that they faced an inferior fighting force in an enormously superior defensive position, and overcame it anyway at catastrophic cost because the tactical situation was virtually impossible regardless of the quality of the defenders. That is actually a more impressive achievement, not less. But it requires understanding the German side of the battle, which the film almost entirely ignores. The opening sequence of Saving Private Ryan is structured to suggest near-total annihilation of the first wave at Omaha Beach. The survival rate implied by what you see on screen is perhaps 5 to 10%. The actual casualty figures for Omaha Beach on June 6th are still debated by historians, but the current best estimates place American killed, wounded, and missing at somewhere between 2,000 and 4,700, out of approximately 34,000 troops who landed that day. That is approximately 6 to 14% casualties. Catastrophic, unprecedented in recent American military experience. But not the near-total destruction the film implies. The film's implied casualty rate comes partly from its focus on the worst-hit unit. Company A of the 116th Infantry, the Bedford Boys. Company A suffered approximately 90% casualties in the first 15 minutes. Using that specific unit's experience to represent Omaha Beach as a whole is like describing the Battle of Britain by focusing exclusively on the squadrons that were completely destroyed. Again, this is not to minimize what happened. Omaha Beach was the worst single day of casualties for American forces in the entire European theater. But the film's visual argument that almost nobody survived the first wave is not historically accurate, and it shapes the audience's understanding of D-Day in ways that obscure the actual tactical story. The entire premise of Saving Private Ryan rests on a specific historical policy. The idea that the US Army would send a squad of Rangers behind enemy lines to retrieve a single soldier because his brothers had all been killed, making him a sole survivor entitled to be sent home. The film presents this as an established functioning policy. The War Department discovers Ryan's situation, issues orders through the chain of command, and Rangers are dispatched. The policy is treated as real, operative, and somewhat bureaucratically routine. Almost none of that is accurate. The film is inspired by the real story of the Niland brothers of Tonawanda, New York. There were 4 Niland brothers who served in World War II. Frederick Niland, Fritz, was the real-life basis for Private Ryan. Here is what actually happened. Robert Niland was killed on June 6, 1944, at Neuville-aux-Plaines, as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne. Preston Niland was killed on June 7, 1944, at Utah Beach with the 4th Infantry Division. Edward Niland was reported missing in Burma. He had been shot down and was believed dead. That left Fritz Niland as the only surviving brother. Or so his family believed. The army did pull Fritz Niland from the front lines and send him home. But the way it happened was nothing like the film. A chaplain, Father Francis Sampson, learned of the family's situation and personally intervened with military authorities. There was no squad of Rangers dispatched. There was no combat mission behind enemy lines. An administrative decision was made, Fritz was located, and he was transferred home. The entire action movie premise of the film, the squad, the mission, the journey through occupied France, is invented. The actual policy response to the Niland situation was a paperwork transfer handled by a chaplain. The policy the film is built around, the sole survivor policy, actually exists, but its origins are different from what most people assume, and its operation in World War II was far more chaotic and inconsistent than the film implies. The policy derives primarily from the loss of the 5 Sullivan brothers, all killed on November 13, 1942, when the USS Juno was sunk by a Japanese torpedo during the naval battle of Guadalcanal. Albert, Francis, George, Joseph, and Madison Sullivan all served on the same ship against Navy regulations, and all died when it sank. The public outrage over the Sullivan brothers, which became a major propaganda story, a film, and eventually a law, was the primary driver of the sole survivor policy. But the policy as it actually operated during World War II was not the clean, functioning system the film depicts. It was inconsistently applied, poorly communicated through the chain of command, and frequently overridden by military necessity. There are documented cases of men who should have been pulled from combat under the policy who were not, because their commanding officers didn't know about it, because the paperwork was delayed, or because the army simply needed warm bodies in the field more than it needed to honor its administrative commitments to grieving families. The film presents a system that functions. The reality was a system that sometimes functioned, sometimes didn't, and was subject to exactly the kind of military bureaucratic chaos that any honest depiction of World War II administration would acknowledge. Let's be specific about the film's central premise, that a squad of Rangers would be sent on a deliberate combat patrol behind enemy lines through occupied Normandy, with the sole objective of finding one private. Military historians and veterans have been consistent on this point. It would not have happened, not because the army didn't care about soldiers' families. It did, and the sole survivor policy proves it, but because the operational and strategic situation in Normandy in the week after D-Day made such a mission an absurdity. The Allies had landed in Normandy on June 6th. They were fighting to hold and expand a beachhead against determined German counterattacks. Every trained ranger was a critical asset. The idea that General Marshall, or anyone in the chain of command, would authorize taking a squad of experienced rangers off the line to conduct what amounts to a search and rescue mission for a single private is operationally nonsensical. The resources expended in the film to bring back one private, 8 soldiers, at least 5 of whom die in the attempt, would represent a negative return on investment by any military calculus. The army was not in the business of expending more lives than it saved, particularly not experienced combat soldiers for a private with no special skills or intelligence value. This is not a minor quibble. The entire moral architecture of the film, Is He Worth It?, is built on a premise that would not have been operationally viable. Real soldiers were sent on real missions that cost real lives during D-Day week. Those missions had military objectives. The Ryan mission doesn't. Captain Miller's unit in Saving Private Ryan is identified as being from the 2nd Ranger Battalion. This is historically significant. The 2nd Rangers were real, they were at D-Day, and their mission was one of the most extraordinary combat actions of the entire war, the assault on Pointe du Hoc. The 2nd Rangers scaled 100-foot cliffs under fire to destroy a German artillery battery that threatened both Utah and Omaha beaches. Of 225 Rangers who landed, only 90 were still capable of fighting 2 days later. The survivors held their position against German counterattacks for 2 days before relief arrived, running low on ammunition and taking casualties throughout. The actual 2nd Rangers were not wandering through Norman hedgerows looking for a private. They were defending a clifftop position in one of the most desperate small unit actions of the entire campaign. Using the 2nd Rangers as the unit in the film without any acknowledgement of what they actually did at D-Day is a specific historical erasure that the World War II research community has noted repeatedly. the 5th Rangers, who actually came ashore at Omaha Beach and whose commander, Colonel Max Schneider, gave the famous order, "Rangers lead the way," are more historically relevant to the Omaha Beach scenes. But the film conflates and invents freely, and the result is a unit that doesn't clearly correspond to any real Rangers organization in the Normandy campaign. Saving Private Ryan has a reputation for extraordinary technical accuracy with World War II weapons and equipment, and in many respects, this reputation is deserved. The M1 Garand, the BAR, the Thompson, the German MG-42, these are period correct and handled with real authenticity. The sound design of the Garand's distinctive ping when the on-block clip ejects is accurate and was deliberately included. But there are specific errors that the World War II research community has documented at length. The most significant is the Tiger tank. The film features a Tiger I tank in the final battle sequence. Tigers were present in Normandy. But the specific tank in the film is not a Tiger I. It is a T-34 Soviet tank dressed up with additional armor panels and a modified turret to look like a Tiger. The proportions are wrong. The running gear is wrong. Tiger I tanks are extraordinarily rare. Only a handful of operational examples survive worldwide, and film productions have historically struggled to accurately represent them. More significantly, the tactical behavior of the Tiger in the film is wrong. Tigers were typically deployed in small concentrated groups and supported by infantry. A single Tiger advancing alone through a village against infantry, as depicted, would not have been standard German tank doctrine. Tigers were valuable, difficult to replace, and generally not committed without support. A German commander sending a single Tiger into a built-up area without infantry screening would have been court-martialed. The STG-44, the Sturmgewehr 44, the assault rifle that influenced nearly every subsequent assault rifle design, including the AK-47, appears in the film, which is period correct for Normandy in 1944. However, it appears with a frequency that overstates its actual distribution among German forces in that campaign. The STG-44 was still being introduced in 1944, and Normandy-based infantry units were predominantly equipped with the Kar-98K bolt-action rifle, not the STG-44. The film's German forces look better equipped with modern assault weapons than they historically were. Military veterans and historians watching Saving Private Ryan often describe a specific frustration. The soldiers in the film frequently do things that actual soldiers would not do, make tactical decisions that trained infantrymen would not make, and survive situations that the film's own internal logic suggests they should not survive. The most cited example is the scene at the radar station, what veterans call a stupid death scenario. Miller's squad takes unnecessary casualties assaulting a defended position that they were not required to assault, to achieve an objective that was not part of their mission. The scene exists to give Corporal Upham a defining moral moment. But the tactical decision-making it requires of the experienced Ranger Officer Miller is, by the assessment of numerous veterans and military analysts who have commented on the film, professionally inexplicable. The treatment of German prisoners throughout the film is also historically complicated. The film depicts soldiers on both sides making decisions about prisoners that real combat soldiers made, sometimes letting them go, sometimes not. But the film's moral framework around these decisions is applied inconsistently in ways that serve narrative rather than historical logic. The most significant tactical error is arguably the final battle at Ramelle. Miller's squad defends a bridge with roughly 8 soldiers against a substantial German armored force. The defensive preparations they make, improvised sticky bombs, sniper positions, explosive charges, are creative and show military thinking. But the force ratios depicted and the outcome stretch credibility in ways that veterans have noted. Small units can delay armored attacks. They cannot, under the tactical conditions shown, hold indefinitely against the force depicted without the film compressing time and convenient plot interventions. Saving Private Ryan made a significant conscious effort to humanize German soldiers to a degree uncommon in Hollywood war films up to that point. The scene where Miller's squad debates what to do with the captured German soldier, Steamboat Willie, and the subsequent scenes involving that character were clearly intended to complicate the simple Allied good, German evil framework of earlier war movies. But the film's treatment of the German military still contains significant distortions that have been extensively noted by historians. The film presents the German soldiers at Omaha Beach and in subsequent scenes as a relatively homogeneous force. In reality, the German military in Normandy in June 1944 was extraordinarily heterogeneous. The 716th Division defenders at Omaha included significant numbers of Osttruppen, Eastern European conscripts, many of whom were fighting under German command against their will, having been given the choice between German service and continued captivity. Some of these men surrendered at the first opportunity. Some were more motivated than the film's generic German soldiers suggest. The diversity of the Wehrmacht in Normandy, by age, nationality, motivation, and capability, is something the film flattens entirely. The film also depicts no SS involvement at Normandy, which is historically inaccurate. The 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, one of the most fanatical and brutal units in the German order of battle, was in Normandy during this period and was responsible for documented war crimes against Canadian prisoners. Their absence from the film's portrayal of the German forces in the Normandy campaign represents a specific choice that simplifies the moral landscape of the battle. I have spent the last 15 minutes cataloguing the film's historical errors, and I want to be completely clear. Saving Private Ryan is, in many respects, the most historically serious American war film ever made. The errors I've described are real, and they matter. But they exist against a background of research, consultation, and technical craft that no previous Hollywood war film had attempted. Spielberg hired Dale Dye, a Marine combat veteran and the founder of Warriors Incorporated, the military technical advisory firm that has shaped the authenticity of dozens of Hollywood productions. As the primary military technical advisor, Dye had the principal cast go through 10 days of boot camp before filming began, living in the field, carrying period equipment, learning to move and react as soldiers. Tom Hanks has described this as one of the most formative experiences of his acting career. The film also consulted directly with D-Day veterans, incorporating their specific memories and sensory recollections into the production design. The decision to use real amputees in the beach sequence, rather than prosthetics on able-bodied actors, came directly from veteran accounts of what the beach actually looked like. That decision, which caused significant challenges for the production, reflects a specific commitment to honest representation that is rare in commercial filmmaking, where Saving Private Ryan is genuinely extraordinary, and where it stands up to historical scrutiny better than almost any criticism can diminish, is in its portrayal of the psychological reality of combat. Miller's trembling hand, the dissociative state soldiers enter during extreme violence, the slowed sound, the underwater quality that Spielberg achieves with his shutter angle, the specific way men process the deaths of their comrades or fail to process them, the numbness that descends after repeated exposure to extreme violence. These are not cinematic inventions, they are documented psychological phenomena. What we now call combat stress reaction, acute stress response, PTSD. And the film depicts them with a clinical accuracy that psychiatrists and combat veterans have consistently praised. The scene where Miller reveals his civilian identity, a schoolteacher from Pennsylvania, is the film's most psychologically sophisticated moment. The revelation that this man who has become synonymous with competent lethal violence was, weeks ago, teaching English literature is not a dramatic device. It is an accurate depiction of the extraordinary psychological transformation that combat induced in civilian soldiers, and the profound disconnection from their pre-war selves that many veterans described as one of the most disorienting aspects of their service. The interpersonal dynamics of Miller's squad, the arguments about the mission, the resentments, the dark humor, the specific hierarchies that form in small units under stress, are extensively validated by veteran accounts and the academic literature on small unit cohesion. The research of S.L.A. Marshall, whose work on small unit behavior in World War II influenced a generation of military historians, described precisely the kind of dynamics the film depicts. The way men fight more for their immediate comrades than for abstract patriotic ideals. The way unit cohesion can dissolve under sustained pressure and reconstitute in unexpected ways. The central role of a trusted NCO or officer in maintaining function under fire. Miller's squad embodies these dynamics with remarkable fidelity. The film also captures something that most war movies of its era did not: the complete failure of military communication. Orders that don't arrive, units that are in the wrong place, chaos that is not the result of individual failure, but of systemic breakdown. The Normandy campaign was, by any assessment, a logistical and communications disaster in its first days, and the film's small unit perspective captures that chaos from the ground level in a way that is historically authentic, even when the specific narrative is invented. Saving Private Ryan is, fundamentally, an American film about an American experience of D-Day. That is legitimate, but it has contributed to a popular understanding of June 6, 1944, that is almost entirely American, and that misrepresents one of the most multinational military operations in history. D-Day involved 5 beaches, 2 of them, Utah and Omaha, were American. The other 3, Gold, Juno and Sword, were assaulted by British and Canadian forces. The total Allied force that landed on June 6 numbered approximately 156,000 troops. American forces comprised roughly 73,000 of those. British and Canadian forces comprised approximately 83,000. There were also French commandos, Norwegian forces, Polish units, Dutch, Belgian, Australian, New Zealand, and Czechoslovak personnel embedded throughout the Allied force. D-Day was not an American operation with Allied support. It was a genuinely multinational Allied operation that the United States participated in, significantly, alongside numerous other nations. The British and Canadian beaches had their own catastrophes and their own extraordinary acts of valor. Juno Beach, assaulted by the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, saw casualty rates in some sectors comparable to Omaha. The towns behind the British beaches, where airborne forces had landed overnight, saw fighting as brutal and confused as anything depicted in the film. The film's American focus is not a historical error. It is a legitimate creative choice. But the cultural weight Saving Private Ryan carries has shaped a generation's understanding of D-Day as primarily an American story. That shaping has real consequences for how the war is remembered internationally, and for the respect owed to the British, Canadian, and other Allied forces whose sacrifice has been largely invisible to American audiences. There is one group almost entirely absent from Saving Private Ryan's portrayal of the Normandy campaign: the French people whose country was being liberated. The Norman civilians who lived through D-Day experienced one of the most catastrophic civilian episodes of the entire Western European campaign. The Allied bombing of Norman towns and transportation hubs, designed to prevent German reinforcement, killed approximately 20,000 French civilians in the weeks surrounding the invasion. The town of Saint-Lô was so thoroughly destroyed that it became known as the capital of ruins. Cota, the primary British objective on D-Day, was reduced to rubble over the course of weeks of fighting. The liberation of France was simultaneously an act of extraordinary sacrifice by Allied forces, and an act that cost French civilian lives on a scale that French historical memory has never fully reconciled with the gratitude owed to the liberators. The French have a complicated relationship with D-Day that the film, which depicts French civilians only as grateful bystanders, does not begin to capture. The soldiers who fought through Norman villages were fighting through the homes, the farms, and the communities of living people. Those people were caught between 2 armies, subject to fire from both sides, watching their country be physically destroyed in the process of its liberation. Their story is not in Saving Private Ryan. It should be part of how we remember D-Day. In 2004, the American Film Institute ranked Saving Private Ryan the 71st greatest American film ever made. It won 5 Academy Awards. It is the film that most Americans point to when asked what World War II was like. That cultural weight, the fact that this film has effectively become the primary historical reference for tens of millions of people, is exactly why the inaccuracies matter. Not because they make it a bad film, they don't. But because a film this influential, this viscerally convincing, that carries this much cultural authority, shapes what questions people think to ask about the real history. People who have seen Saving Private Ryan feel they understand D-Day. They understand the sensory experience of Omaha Beach. Imperfectly, but genuinely. They do not know about the Shingle Bank. They do not know about the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. They do not know that the Sole Survivor mission is a dramatic invention built on a chaplain's paperwork request. They do not know about the 20,000 French civilians. Steven Spielberg made a film that more people have wept over than have read a single book about D-Day. That is an extraordinary achievement and a significant responsibility. The film honors the soldiers who fought. It does not fully honor the history they were part of. The messy, multinational, morally complicated, enormously costly history of what actually happened in Normandy in the summer of 1944. The men who were there. The ones still alive, the ones who have left their testimonies behind. They deserve both the film and the full picture. Because the full picture, as always, is more extraordinary than what Hollywood gave us. Harold Baumgarten, the veteran I mentioned at the beginning, wrote a memoir about his experience at Omaha Beach called Eyewitness on Omaha Beach. He survived being shot 5 times on that beach. He spent the rest of his life making sure people understood what actually happened there. He said Saving Private Ryan was the closest any film came to the truth. He also spent years correcting what it got wrong. Both of those things were true at the same time. That is the honest position on this film. It is a masterpiece. It is also a simplification of history that the actual history does not need. The real D-Day. With all its multinational complexity, its racial history, its civilian cost, its tactical chaos, is not a less powerful story than the one Spielberg told. It is a more powerful one. If this kind of history, the kind that fills in what the films leave out, that gives the full picture to people who deserve it, is what you're here for, subscribe. I have a lot more of this coming. Thanks for watching.